Forbes India, Influencers of Change, in partnership with UIPath.
Digitally transforming an enterprise in an effective manner, although necessary in today's disruptive times, is still a tall order. For a conglomerate with diverse businesses across geographies spanning services and manufacturing, that mission appears to be almost impossible, especially considering the wheels of change for entire industries are spinning faster than ever before, even as smaller but nimble players try to carve out a niche. But there are brands that do it right. These influencers of change have mastered the art of weaving technology and automation into a large and complex corporate tapestry, which enables them to see the big picture when it comes to improving the way things work, carving new paths to growth using untapped synergies, and creating happy employees and customers in the process. On this episode of our special presentation titled Forbes India Influencers of Change in partnership with UiPath, we speak with the masters of transformation and understand how they go beyond the industry standard and rise to be state of the art. I'm your host Gautam Srinivasan, and joining me in this conversation on leveraging automation to drive digital transformation in business are Anand Lakshmi Varahan, Group CDO at Vedanta Limited, Deepa Ranjit, Head of Digital in the Group Technology Office at Mahindra Group, and to provide the enablement perspective on automation from a global and regional standpoint, we are joined by UiPath Scott Hunter, VP for Customer Strategy and Solutions, and Anil Bhasin, MD and VP for the Indian and South Asian region. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this talk. Let's start by understanding how digital transformation decisions should be guided and then expand on how technology enables customer centricity. So, Anand, we'll start with you. You've been a transformation leader at global multinationals for more than 2 decades. So, what are the key tenets of influencing digital transformation in large conglomerates that guide you in making decisions that now enable Vedanta to be digital first?
There are multiple things that we've experienced over the years, but if I were to pick 2 or 3 really important things along a transformation journey, particularly digital transformation journey, I think one is about putting business at the front, right? I mean, digital at times when people start talking about digital and digital transformation, it tends to be a technology conversation. But increasingly, we're saying, how do we look at an array of emerging technologies that are out there and solve very specific business problems and business opportunities? It's almost like saying, it has to be business led and not technology or digital led. And a very related point, again, that we've experienced over the journeys is competencies that are required in the journey. Essentially, how do you get people and capabilities that combine knowledge of business and technology, right? So if you have to run these transformation programs, I think you need that capability. Second, I think, is a more softer aspect. It's about personal leadership, what I would even call, entrepreneurial ability in large corporates. When you have to drive these programs, really bring about change, I think it requires that personal leadership within individuals to be able to drive it and bring about change. And lastly, again, more a softer point, given the dynamism that is there in not only the business scenarios, but also emerging technologies, I think, again, a softer aspect that's required is mental flexibility and adaptation, right? How do you research, new areas and then use them to address topics, opportunities in the business is becoming extremely important. So really, in summary, have business at the front, nurture personal leadership, and then, of course, make sure that people have the mental flexibility and adaptation around all the dynamism that's happening around us, both on the business and the technology side.
All right. So tenets there coming in from Anand. And as he said, you need to make technology work for business rather than the opposite. And of course, the leadership aspect comes into play as well. And the adaptability according to circumstances to tune your strategy. Great points there. Deepa, let me bring you in at this point. Your vast experience in a variety of multinational projects has been seen as the perfect example of consumer orientation with business impact, something which Anand has also cited. So could you give us some examples on how you managed to define, design, and deliver on business outcomes with that idea through digital implementations?
Sure. First of all, glad to be part of this panel. Um, Getting directly to the point that you mentioned, and Anand kind of addressed that as well in terms of the business impact, really. I think for me, the key is business outcomes. I think in my experience, I have seen that if you begin with business outcomes or a business problem statement, then we know where we are getting to, the goal that we want to get to. So one is start with business outcomes. Second is, if we do not start with business outcomes, if we do start with the power of technology, at least define what we want to get out of it from a potential benefit perspective. And I'll quote some examples here. So just giving how this works. So for one of my ex-clients, the idea was to reduce call center expenses and see how we can use bots to replace call centers if that's a feasibility. Now, in this case, the business impact is very clear. We are talking about cost reduction in terms of call center reduction of cost. But if we see, you also mentioned very clearly about customer orientation, which is very important. Now, bots can replace what we are trying to converse in that sense. But essentially, do we define it in a design thinking method to make sure that we are answering for what the customers are looking for, and therefore be able to achieve those business benefits in a more correct fashion in that sense? So start with the business problem statement or the business outcome, which in this case was clearly cost savings that we were looking at, and design it for the customer. Design customer orientation. Keep all stakeholders in perspective when we design the entire bit, and then of course deliver. So that's one. In such cases, we start with the problem statement. But then there are many times uh, a lot of our clients would, or group companies would reach out to say, hey, there is a power of data. What can we do with data? How can I cross sell? How can I upsell? Will it have an impact? Here we do not have the business impact defined upfront, in which case what we typically do is essentially say, hey, yes, power of data, this is the data that we're looking at. Data integrations will give us a lot of value. But if we talk about, say, cross selling, upselling, whatever value or use cases that we define, right up front, define what is the impact that it will potentially create, and be bold to have an ambition towards that goal. So for example, if you're talking about the power of data, will I be able to cross sell? Will I be able to upsell? And if that's the case, what's the ambition that I take for a 2 or 3 year journey? Now, often what is also important in the second example is we don't go end to end. We start with 2 or 3 sets of data, and therefore it is very important to, in the define, design, and deliver phases, do it in an incremental manner. Pay and then reap, and pay and reap, and pay and reap. That's how we get to the business benefits through digital implementations. This is in my experience.
All right, a great point there. First, frame the problem, then structure the solution, and then understand the impact. Some lessons in excellence coming in from our masters of transformation. Let's hear what the enablers of transformation have to say about that. Scott, let me understand from you, how does UiPath enable conglomerates to successfully embark and navigate a digital-first future and convert data to profits? Could you provide us with some global use cases where UiPath has delivered values to its customers and the thinking that guides UiPath's approach?
Absolutely. So I love what Deepa just said. And I typically go and talk to customers at the C level, and I always want to know what their vision is, their business vision, where they have to go and how they're going to get there. And then strategy-wise, how fast do they have to get to that vision, and what path are they going to take? And then typically we then break it down into the business process and use case. So we understand where the problem's at and what are they trying to fix. So you start to really put structure around the problem at hand. And once I understand what problem they're trying to fix or understand the use cases, then I want to know how they're going to measure it. And so I always look at the metrics and the KPIs associated with those use cases. And then again, we get back to the 4 different types of value. And this goes back again to what Deepa was saying. If I frame up the issue, I want to understand where the value is coming from. So there's hard dollars that go to the top line and bottom line on my balance sheet or my income statement. There is intangible value that usually has to do with governance, risk, and compliance. And that's typically a discussion I have with the CFO and the CISO. So it's about security, and it has to do with regulatory reporting. The next bucket of value is my total cost of ownership that we deal with my CIO. They want to know how much does it cost to run my IT portfolio. And then finally, there's strategic value that has to do with M&A type activity, where companies are purchased and we have a variety of back-end systems that we have to work around. So once I have that structure in place, then you start to see where companies actually lay in this whole idea about the automation operating model. It's the governance, it's the structure, it's the executive sponsorship, it's the structuring of the use cases and understanding which use cases give you back the best return. It's about training, it's about enablement, and then it's the structure itself of the COE and how they actually work through. So let me give an example of a great use case for Chevron. So Chevron is a 142-year-old company, very structured, but they've actually done some automation, and they've got about 300 automations that are going on now, and they've saved themselves about 600,000 hours through these automations. And the automations are everything from finance and accounting across the top of the ERP system, all the way out to the drilling of the wells. So you can actually apply the automation at a variety of different levels in the industries in order to actually address specific problems, so that we can address problems based upon the horizontal, which has to do with the line of business, HR, IT, supply chain, legal, or you could go very deep into our demand workbooks that have to do with, say, oil and gas or any kind of conglomerate. So it's very fascinating, but it's worthwhile to step back, analyze the problem, help the customer, and then prioritize those use cases.
Absolutely. And Chevron is also a great example, the work that UiPath has done, where the value is not just in terms of cost savings or the bottom line, but also empowering the workforce. Let's expand on some of the points that you have mentioned, Scott, and bring in Anil at this point. Anil, taking forward that question, what does UiPath bring to the table in terms of enabling conglomerates to view UiPath not just as an enabler during implementation, but also as an advisor during the blueprint phase when they are framing the problem, as Deepa mentioned?
Yeah, great question, Gautam. I think it really depends on how we want to position ourselves and come across to our customers. I think we are very clear. We see ourselves as a strategic partner to our customers. And the way we kind of do that is we try and understand their business problems, their business priorities first. I think that is very, very critical. And importantly, understand if there is a clarity around the automation vision that they have and a clear differentiated strategy for that enterprise, right? If they don't have that, it is our responsibility to work with all of their stakeholders so that we can help them build this clear automation vision and strategy. And this is what we do, is bring in our best, I would say, skill sets involving our industry consulting teams, our value engineering teams, our automation consulting teams on a pro bono basis so that we can help frame what is called, a fully automated enterprise, and bringing in global business transformational best practices that industry is seeing is one of the value proposition that we bring in as part of this approach, right? Obviously, the business value needs to be clearly called out when we talk about this. And what is that business value? It's actually a combination of looking at business outcomes like how do we achieve sustainable business growth? What would the differentiated customer experience look like? What would be a faster go-to-market look like? A higher productivity, increased operational efficiency look like? Importantly, increased employee engagement look like? Because we have to make sure that we are tying people, process, and technology together in this digital transformation discussion and blueprint. We then need to make sure that this vision is backed by an executive sponsorship at a boardroom level and has the budgets, because no point talking about a strategy which is not backed with budgets and resources to make it successful. And I think what we've seen is successful organizations that have traversed this path is really when they have a clear digital blueprint which has got signed off, is milestone based. So you know where do you need to be in 6 months time, and then look at what outcomes were achieved. I think the whole notion that we cannot tie ourselves to business outcomes is gone. In fact, I completely agree with Anand. This is actually a business-led conversation. And organizations like UiPath, I think we've morphed towards being a strategic partner because we want to hold ourselves accountable to business outcomes. And that can only happen when you look at the entire ecosystem in play for a complete solution which is integrated. And that is where you have to have a platform that brings in those kind of capabilities. What we've done is simple. We've built a layer, a platform that sits on top of every application and every database. And this is enterprise wide and way beyond that, right? And our bots simplify work, which is automating across any combination of applications and databases, right? So this is not about creating a department wide set of use cases. I think that's just the basic expectation, but it's really about how do these use cases bring value tied to business outcomes. And I think it's really about consumption and value realization that the board expects for the digital transformation journey to be seen as successful. And that's what we do every single day, Gautam.
All right. Value and outcome, two keywords guiding the thought around digital transformation. Well, from a broader perspective, let's take a deep dive into the finer points of the digital transformation stories which are underway at Vedanta and Mahindra. Anand, from digital smelter solutions at Jharsuguda using digital twin technology for improving efficiency remotely to automated operator rounds and digitalized control room logbooks for enabling remote operations at oil facilities. Vedanta seems adept at scaling digital transformation in terms of doing more with less as part of Project Pratham. So I want to understand from you, how did Vedanta address friction points in digitizing the production value chain, considering the transnational nature and the large nature of your enterprise?
Yeah, sure, Gautam. Yeah, I mean, clearly there are no easy answers there, I would say, because the friction that you mentioned are of different types. But I think so. I see it as a journey, right? Two, three things that has helped us. One, I think to what Anil said about, this has to be a boardroom conversation, real commitment from the top, right? I think. That's been a sort of a blessing for us, because to give you all a sense, I mean, our chairman spends about anywhere between 60 to 90 minutes every week on the overall transformation program that we call Project Pratham, right, at Vedanta. So I interact a lot of people on the network. I increasingly I see that at that levels, organizations have started sort of engaging in these discussions and statuses. So clearly, I think that's important, right from the top. If there is interest, there is engagement, that makes a huge difference. And sort of the organization then rallies behind you. The second one I would say is, I mean, today, as we speak, over the last, let's say, 14, 15 months, we have a roadmap for every business, some of which you sort of talked about, Gautam. So we're running anywhere between 200 to 220 initiatives, right? All sizes, small, medium, complex initiatives. And if I look at these initiatives and how the roadmap was built, almost 60-70% of it was built inside out, right? Which means these were ideas that came from people within the enterprise. The way that helps remove friction is because if the idea owner, in terms of keeping it business led and having people within the enterprise drive their own ideas, so it then removes friction, because there are idea owners who are passionately driving change within the organization, right? So that was the second point, in terms of saying, how do you energize and facilitate idea owners within the enterprise to execute on their ideas, so that it again remains frictionless. The third one, I think, incentivize people. I think one of the unique things, again, we did over the last 6-7 months is we almost ran like what we internally call a digital Olympics. This was in simple parlance an idea generation competition, but we sort of took it to the next level to say that if the idea owners executed on the idea and they delivered the outcome, then they sort of get a share of the value that gets generated, right? So again, sort of really enable and incentivize people to pick up the idea right from concept to execution and go live, and value generation and accrual, right? So it almost then the role of the digital office or the business leadership then becomes one of a facilitator, and then teams are passionately driving ideas. So I think these are some I would say examples, Gautam, of the journey that we've gone through, and how we've removed friction from the system as we went through the journey.
Indeed, executive sponsorship, building ideas from inside out, and of course, incentivize those who came up with the idea from idea to execution, and of course, then see the magic happen. But in this context, Anand, how important is automation as part of the enablement strategy, whether it's about improving workforce productivity or reducing turnaround time across, I believe, 17 verticals in the Vedanta group? What are the value gaps that are still left to be addressed?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Automation, very, very critical, right? And particularly when you begin the journey, I think the low-hanging fruits are, in large enterprises that we've all worked with. And I know Scott took the example of Chevron, having worked with integrated oil companies prior to in the consulting career as well. I think you really have those enormous amounts of spreadsheets and reports and people spending time on them, that goes on, right, in pockets of business. So really automation and usage of bots, to address, and in some cases actually make it almost like a self-serve or a factory model where people can create automation of their own, right? And almost democratize that whole process. That's becoming very important. I think we've got several examples of how we have done that within the oil and gas side of the business and the mining and metal side of the business. It can range anywhere from again, to sort of parallel it to what Scott said about Chevron. We're talking about let's say automating a daily production report, which gets data from our production systems, to automating, our JV, joint venture processes on the finance side, to procurement and other enabling functions. So clearly, automation underpins and is a sort of the one that sort of begins this overall journey. But obviously, then we also focus, being an industrial company, automation of our core processes and sort of building analytics and insights on top of it. So that's been a key focus as well. Yeah, Gautam, I would sort of stop by saying that it's important, or at least we are at a juncture where we are saying, how do you proliferate this by democratizing it, right? I mean, we're no more in that phase where people can give a set of requirements and somebody sits and develops these automation. Can you give that power in the hands of the end user so that they can automate their own processes, right? That's really where I see this all going, Gautam.
Absolutely. Use automation and analytics to arrive at that single source of truth and then disseminate it across the enterprise. Of course, we are seeing the scope of automation expand as well, from enabling remote operations when it comes to oil field drilling, mapping. Lots of possibilities open up. But let's shift focus to understand more about the digital transformation story happening at the Mahindra Group. Deepa, as a conglomerate, Mahindra Group was predominantly involved in selling through storefront dealership branches across its automobile, agriculture, finance, real estate, logistics, and used cars divisions. Now, while some businesses like Mahindra Finance, so to say, were more mature, where consumers could consume more digitally in an online manner, the rest still, needed some physical aspect. So how is automation enabling the group to innovate for the digital last mile in this new normal of phygital interactions between brands and customers? And how do you harmonize that experience across diverse businesses?
Sure. Yeah, I think what you said as an example was one that I would pick as well. If you look at Mahindra Finance, for example, right? Finance as a sector, it's easy for a customer, thinking from a customer standpoint, it's easy for a customer to buy a loan online or an insurance online or do any kind of banking transaction online. But when you buy a vehicle, you want to test drive it. So there will always be this physical and digital coming together, and therefore the phygital journey. I think the most important key and the role that I think digital transformation and automation play in this phygital journey is first understand and accept that not everything will be digital. There has to be a phygital journey, first thing. I think there are many examples how we use, again, focusing on the business outcome and the customer experience. Some of the elements that we have tried, tested, and have worked out, for example, chatbots. Any kind of self-serving thing, right? Like from a customer standpoint, use of chatbots to answer many queries that the customer may have. The second big example is digital onboarding. For some of the sectors, like for example, Mahindra Holidays, right? Onboarding of a customer can take a couple of weeks at times. Now, do we really need to go in the process route? And we heard that just now as well. Do we really need to go through the Excels and the files and transformation in the way that we do? Or do we really think customer first? We think business outcome. Can this be completely automated? And we took that journey in Mahindra Holidays as an example, right? And beautifully, what you could do in a couple of weeks, beautifully can be done in a couple of seconds or minutes, right? So that's the power of automation that can, the way it can help. The other use cases where I see the Mahindra Group thinking big is, for example, artificial intelligence for cross-selling and upselling. Of course, maintaining the data security and privacy standards at the utmost level. But across the group, there are many potential areas here as well. I think what is important for companies to think or conglomerates to think from a digital journey perspective is the entire omni-channel experience, right? Is to ensure that the experience, whether you go from a website to a dealer, to a call center, to a chatbot, there could be various journeys. So understanding what the customer personas are, what are the journeys, and therefore defining for that is going to be very critical. At a group level, to your point on what are the opportunities or how do we harmonize this entire experience, there are two big elements, as I would say, right? One is for the journeys that are predominantly very sector focused, we let the sector be and define for their journeys. For the journeys where we see an interplay is something that we harmonize and try to see where the benefits are in that sense. So that's how, and I see in large conglomerates, I see that as a huge opportunity. Also, this is from a customer standpoint. Now, if you start looking at an internal standpoint, whether you look at an employee standpoint or the processes simplification, all of that, I think there is huge potential for conglomerates to move in that direction to standardize processes across the group, have respect policies that are specific to group companies, but standardized processes, have common platforms, automate whatever you can at the back end, because the employee experience will eventually lead to your customer experience as well. So that's also important to kind of consider from a group standpoint.
That's a great point. In fact, I want to expand on that and understand from you, Deepa, and how do you ensure that the change influenced by technology and automation benefits all stakeholders within and outside the organization so that it's in that balancing act, for example, in trying to say solve for customer experience. Let's say you try to not make the back-end process more cumbersome for employees. And, in that context, what is your expectation from, say, external technology partners who the Mahindra Group works with to create those solutions? How do you manage this balancing act of making things easy for customers and employees?
That's actually a very good point, and that's like a non-negotiable, right? Like We spoke in the beginning of this conversation about business impact, right? We spoke about customer orientation. In my opinion, both of these cannot be addressed till you don't address the employee experience as well, because it is natural human behavior. If we have a very cumbersome process at the at the back end, uh, the employees are by default going to take an alternate route, which means whatever we did will not get adopted, which means it will in fact impact your customer experience and impact the business potential as well, what you're trying to drive to. So to the question of what we expect from partners is two things. One is a design thinking methodology. So define personas, define and understand what each customer persona would need. Now, when we are doing this, keep employees in mind and define for them as well. So while we standardize processes, while we automate what we need to, keep the employees as a persona and design the processes for them as well. So that's an important point. The second element that we expect our partners to bring on board with a lot of experience in the other sectors and other companies as well is the end-to-end thinking. So for example, if I take a customer bot or some kind of a customer process and sort only for the employee experience directly linked, that's a given. I think it is important to start seeing how the entire ecosystem plays, and we expect our partners to be able to identify right up front what is the external ecosystem, what is the internal ecosystem that it will potentially impact or can impact, and therefore think of a roadmap that covers for the customers, the employees for sure, but also the other ecosystem that could be external or internal within the organization. And therefore, the roadmap is designed for all three stakeholders in that sense.
All right, Scott. Deepa has beautifully framed the expectation. As you said, don't leave out the employees when you are designing the solution. It has to be friendly for both employees and for customers. And of course, end-to-end thinking when designing answers to the problems your customers face. Your response to that first, and as an extension of that, could we see more partnerships open up between conglomerates and tech players to better leverage the data that they have towards improving efficiencies and customer experiences? What does your global experience suggest?
This is great. And it's a great kind of example that Deepa gave about the persona. So let me give you kind of an example. I posted this about 2 or 3 months ago, but it showed someone in a call center, a typical call center. And typically that person's got to be very gifted about opening up the right screens. They open up ServiceNow, they open up SAP, they open up Salesforce. And let's say someone calls in, and let's say it's Deepa. And Deepa says, they open the screens up, and it takes a long time to open the screens up. And then finally I get to maybe 4 or 5 minutes into the call. I says, Deepa, can you give me your ID number? And she gives me the ID number. I close that screen. Then it says, Deepa, can you spell your last name? You put that in. And it continues on until we finally get maybe 10 minutes into the conversation to say, Deepa, what do you want to do? She says, I want to change my password. And you go, okay, I'll change the password. Someone from IT will get back with you. If you look at it from an automation standpoint, when someone calls in, you punch one button, the robot opens up all 13 screens. You say, Deepa, may I have your employee ID number? You put it in, and then it populates everything from the other systems, and finally gets down within about 5 or 6 seconds. It says, Deepa, what would you like to do? I'd like to change my password. So suddenly you can take this and you're really streamlining what the employee is going through, but you're also very much compressing the time that the customer has to be on the phone. So these are great examples about how the personas can change and what value you get out of it. So the robot doesn't have an attitude. It doesn't make mistakes. It can do stuff really fast. And it's something the employees like because they don't have to repeat this process. And it's something where if you're a customer, rather than be on the phone and repeat yourself and give all kinds of information over and over and over again, it can be done in a matter of seconds. So these are great examples about how design thinking and the personas actually can help the internal process, the employee's process, the customer's process, and then ultimately the outside process of the journey. I think the other part of it also has to do with that we have taken many years to get to the landscape that we have. So we're kind of dealt those cards. And so we have to actually look and see how can the platform help us get and leverage up the data that's in the landscape. So like the example I gave you, many different landscapes underneath, SAP, a ServiceNow, Salesforce, et cetera. And you have to use those landscapes because it costs millions of dollars to actually implement those. And we can't change them. So you're going to actually run our technology across the top to actually lever up the data that's inside of those specific legacy systems. So I think it's a great way to actually lever this up and work through the journey and deliver value to the customer, deliver value to the employee, deliver value to the external ecosystem.
All right, add context to design thinking when it comes to solution. But when it comes to value, Anil, I want to hear your thoughts on this. Companies of all sizes, they also tend to focus on ROI, and the formula for successful ROI is different for different sized enterprises. Now, many companies, they struggle with the upfront cost, but the cost of not adopting may be higher or even fatal. So how can companies, especially large conglomerates, develop incremental plans that focus on, say, a critical area such as downtime, with plans to scale the system up as results pay for themselves, say, to increase production?
Yeah, so Gautam, we talked about this, that automation clearly is a journey. It has to be focused on business outcomes. It has to be very clear in delivering tangible benefits. So the way to do is, and again, you're right, different companies have different approaches. The way we have seen many organizations, there are two approaches. One is a bottoms-up approach, where it's really about start small, right? So it's what is called a true land and expand model, where you take the low-hanging fruit, and usually it's the back-end automation, where customers start with either a single department, maybe a couple of use cases, hope and focus on delivering quick wins that also excite the employees as well as demonstrate values to the executives, in which case you kind of then start rolling this up to more and more departments. And as use cases expand, obviously, more bots take over more of these processes and kind of help drive this adoption, right? The fast forward way of obviously the end game is where you have, I think, like Anand mentioned, the complete citizen development program, where you democratize automation, where each end user is therefore responsible for bringing in their ideas of what else is possibly, the art of the possible, to kind of look at automations in their own areas. And then you get the cumulative effect from an enterprise perspective. It's almost like a flywheel that you create, where almost on a single daily basis, automation is seen as the innovation lever that builds a differentiated business strategy, right? So I think from our standpoint, again, we've seen a lot of organizations first focus on areas which give them immediate, I would say, benefits, either in the form of direct cost savings or in the form of productivity gains or in the combination of both, right? Our approach is really to help organizations create what is called as a robust automation operating model, which has fully defined policies. It has a center of excellence structure and very clear program metrics. So that's the approach that we follow. And essentially then using this approach, like I said, create these low-hanging fruit wins, where you take the top priority use cases, pick up a couple of departments and deliver that. As we do that, we also look at a very focused deep dive assessment of the processes that are running, and also look at the potential opportunities that may come in terms of probably even redesigning some of these business processes for customers. So it's really going to be looking at that roadmap, where you not just look at the automation operating model. It has program metrics, it has clear implementation schedules, it has clear tangible outcomes, and then you kind of look at the value that you've been delivering, and hopefully you extrapolate that in the form of like I said, the complete blueprint for what a fully automated enterprise would look like. And that's something that we've seen take some time. The other approach is to go top down. Many organizations go from top down, say, okay, it's called the honeycomb effect, where you gather use cases across all the departments that are there, build stakeholdership with all of the personas, and make sure that we are tying to each of their departments the business outcomes that they would expect in a cumulative fashion. And I think it really is, in my view, the most successful organizations on digital transformation acceleration journeys that we've seen is where you have a top-down approach. And that's what we also recommend. But again, it's like you said, different organizations, different approaches. I think both are trying to get to the same outcome. It's just that one, in my view, has been more successful than the other.
All right, Deepa, your thoughts on the point that Anil has raised, and especially on this incremental approach.
Yeah, I think I really like the way he phrased it on the two approaches. I think it's for me, I would go with a hybrid approach. I completely agree with Anil. It has to be top down driven if you really are looking for a large transformation. Having said that, on the incremental approach, like when we start large transformations, naturally all of us prioritize on the quick wins. One thing that we have seen that works for us is a pay and reap. So something that Anil spoke of, the quick wins really, right? When we identify what are the areas that will really be able to show where there'll be less investments, high returns, we of course prioritize that. The idea is of course to link back to the business outcomes and demonstrate the business outcomes. Once you've demonstrated the business outcomes and therefore the tangible and intangible benefits, you use the money that you helped to save in the first bit to invest for the next wave. So we define waves in an iterative approach so that we can reuse the money that we saved in the first wave in the next wave. So we can do a 6 monthly or whatever, depending on the quick wins. But I like Anil's thinking, and we also typically combine both the approaches. But in the incremental one, it is very important to show back the savings early on and reuse that money as a funding mechanism to move forward for where we don't have the honeycomb effect.
All right. But of course, the hybrid approach works. Let's expand on this point on how to stay ahead of the curve. And I'll bring in Anand and Deepa for their thoughts and get in Scott's response after that. Anand, considering large conglomerates have many moving parts, and as Anil mentioned, if you consider automation as the innovation lever, we have change and technology implementations taking time, and especially when you consider nimbler competitors out there in each vertical that you operate in. How do you stay ahead of the technology curve, considering the sheer size of your enterprise, and still effectively manage rather data security and privacy at such a large scale?
So Gautam, I think in terms of how we sort of stay ahead, what I'd say is, I mean, when we started the journey as well, we were sort of conscious saying that we were always fast followers, right? I think what I mean by that is, we use this term internally called as a copy paste, right? I mean, a global copy paste. It could be, for example, I pick up that Deepa is doing something at the Mahindra Group that sounds interesting, or let's say Scott mentioned Chevron, and then maybe we just follow through that conversation, understand its applicability to our context, and quickly copy paste in our environment. And then there is also a local copy paste, which is essentially if one of the group companies has done something very interesting, they were an early adopter of one technology. How do I sort of quickly horizontally deploy it to the another group company, right? So really, if you ask me, more of an outside in view, time to time, largely enabled through a partner ecosystem, right? I mean, have continuous conversations with them, look at what some of the global majors in the space are doing, and then fast follow, right? The second dimension to this, and I think we've been reasonably successful, 6 7 months back, we launched a global open innovation program called Vedanta Spark. This is, if you like, it's a startup program where we invited roughly 1400 1500 startups, global startups, Indian startups, to sort of come and express interest to work with us, right? And so obviously we went through a process. We've actually now, around May June, we've got the first cohort of about 25 startups that are piloting within our operations across our businesses. And these are again, intelligent automation type programs that they are deploying on, right? Again, I think, to the point that you made about being nimble, I think, one is of course the niche startup offering, but more importantly, I think 300 400 of Vedanta's employees have actually gone through this journey of speaking to these startups, evaluating them. I think we've learned a lot in the overall process on how to be nimble, how do we bring about these change really quickly. So I think that's helped us as well in terms of progressing and staying ahead of the technology curve. Gautam.
Absolutely. And Spark is a great example of an initiative where, say, a large conglomerates, co-creates value with startups and manages to stay ahead of the technology curve. Deepa, your thoughts on this large conglomerate staying ahead of the technology curve is a tall order because things take time, because there are so many moving parts. How do you manage to do it and still effectively, harness data security and privacy?
Yes, I think two parts, and I'll take the data security privacy as a second part. But for the first part that you were talking about, nimbler versus large organizations, right? Uh, First of all, just to keep ourselves updated, and these are the sort of networks, right? We have our industry networks, we have our partner ecosystem, we have the startup ecosystem that we constantly keep talking to on newer things that are happening in the industry, what's happening in the Western world. So we keep ourselves abreast in that sense. But essentially, as you keep deploying, you're right, things change so dramatically. So what we do here is, Mahindra Group actually is more a federated organization than a conglomerate. We basically encourage also nimble experiments within the group companies. So while I had digital at the group, it's not that everything comes in a single place. We do encourage experiments within the manufacturing plants, within supply chain, within customer service, within sales, within marketing. So there are various teams that keep experimenting on newer technologies. And these nimble experiments kind of give us those values as well. And basically these all come together to a common platform and a governance platform to say which are the ones that essentially go for scale up basis, the business impact that they've demonstrated. So that's one. The second is, of course, at Group Technology Office, where I'm part of, my team essentially really works on the new age emerging technologies. So we are constantly looking at, apart from the BAU and the business impact that is supposed to be happening for the group, what are the areas that we should be focusing on? So, for example, right now my team's working on 5G and how 5G will impact the Indian market, our manufacturing plants. Where do we look at? What do we look at? And we are actually running pilots for 5G, right? So this is kind of also helps us to stay ahead of the curve, try those experiments while things become mainstream, and then have a governance platform to get everything together to see which ones go for scale up and where's the real meat in that sense. On the second bit on data security and privacy that you spoke of, very important question. I think that's more to do with the governance mechanism that we put in place, more than a technology aspect. And as an organization, we are very, very clear on certain elements on data security and data privacy laws. And because there are also group companies that are listed, but otherwise as well, even from a data privacy standpoint, from a customer standpoint, we put those processes in place. We in fact have a rigorous group level led program around this entire concept of data security and privacy for group companies. So the governance is what matters there. And of course, then there's an implementation from that perspective.
All right, let me get Scott to respond to the points that Deepa and Anand have raised. Scott, from the global experience, how do large conglomerates stay ahead of that technology curve? And as we spoke about, still manage data security and privacy. If you could cite some examples for us.
Well, I'll tell you what we do internally, and this is what we do for our customers. So it's very true about customers are very hungry to understand what do other customers look at. So we keep a library, and it continues to grow, of use cases. So it's horizontal use cases and then use cases by subvertical. So we have this rich set of use cases. They continue to grow, and it's something where our customers enjoy going in and seeing what's available and what other customers have done. The next thing we have done is actually have invested a lot in benchmarking. So this goes back to we have the capability to benchmark our customers by process. And it's always interesting. Many customers want to know, are we best in class? What do we set within the process? So benchmarking, I think, is always good to go back and figure out, are you pushing the edge of technology, and are you moving towards best in class in performance? The other thing we've done is outside ins, and we run a set of diagnostics where we can look at the different areas that we can automate. We then run the benchmark against it, and we can actually show customers what they've already have achieved based upon the headcount and the certain processes they want to automate by sub-process. And it allows us to have a diagnostic to look from outside in. And then I think the last thing is a collection of our customer success stories. It's always interesting that oil and gas companies want to know, hey, what's Chevron done? What are the other companies have done, say, in upstream oil and gas type of operations? Or if you're in manufacturing, what can I do in order to speed the manufacturing process so that I can keep my E-bomb and M-bomb aligned, which is usually a very manual, tedious process that could be done with automation. And so we find ourselves doing this at the same time that the customers are asking, how do I continue to stay ahead? And then I think the other thing that's super important is UiPath's also on a journey. So if you look about 5 years ago, we were automating simple processes and doing screen scrapes. Now we're a platform that's going across an organization, so it's a enterprise level. And then as we get to 2030, only a few years from now, it's going to be a completely automated enterprise. And when we look at the total addressable market, the addressable market in 2030 is estimated to be at like $3.6 trillion. So we're on this journey, and the more and more technology that we get in, AI and ML, we will continue to actually kind of move the envelope in regards to what are we going to get out of the systems. So I think it's exciting because we're on a journey, and the way we scale is to actually share the information back and forth with our customers or potential customers.
Absolutely. And enablers transforming themselves. Deepa, anything to add here to basis what Scott said?
Yeah, I think you mentioned a very good point, and I did mention that we stay in touch with our partners and want to know what's happening in the industry. But he very beautifully brought up this point, which is what we do as well. Basically, we are very open to our partners telling us, what's happening in the industry. That's a given. But really, where do they see us? Where are we standing in the entire thing with the benchmarking aspect that he's mentioned? So we do our internal benchmarks as well, vis-a-vis the industry as to where we lie with various processes, with various technologies. But I think this is something that we look forward to our partners as well, to give us real feedback. Deepa, you might be thinking you're doing great work, but this is exactly where you are with the technology landscape haven't taken over wherever it has. So very important to hear that from our partners as well.
All right, taking cue from an old fairy tale, I guess the line could be mirror, mirror on the wall. When it comes to technology, do I stand tall? That's what enterprises expect in their interaction with partners, to give them that benchmarking and help them understand how the outcomes can deliver value. Well, as we head to the last leg of the conversation, let's get a forward-looking statement from Anand and Deepa and Anil. So Anand, we'll start with you. Do you see intelligent automation playing a crucial role in catapulting India to reach that $5 trillion target by 2024-25?
Well, absolutely, Gautam. I think the answer is yes, and I think if I take an industrial lens to it, being part of a large industrial organization, I mean, automation and intelligent technologies can obviously not only optimize and drive production volumes and help reduce operating costs within the enterprise, which finally, of course, from an economy perspective, will drive growth. If I think about new capital investments that are being made, right, to again drive economic growth, I think automation will continue to play a large role. In fact, even if I take our oil and gas business, a couple of years back, we've sort of acquired 52 exploration blocks. I mean, fairly huge, even in a global context, for a independent private operator to be able to acquire. But the question then was, how do you explore them, how do you drill, and how do you produce from them, and the number of people and the resources needed to do that, right? Again, I think the answer lies in automation, in terms of how do you deploy intelligent automation in powering your business growth, and then in turn sort of obviously powering the growth of the economy. One other thing, I think very passionate about the topic. I think we've had probably 30 or 35 unicorns within the Indian context, even so far through the year. I think that's, and a lot of them, I think deep tech startups that are applying intelligent automation and technology. So I do see they also becoming a mainstream in the overall economic growth as we move forward. So absolutely the answer is yes, Gautam.
All right. A yes from Anandipa. Your thoughts on intelligent automation powering the next phase of growth for India?
I think absolutely yes, right? Like I think we discussed this. So there, in the last couple of years, many companies have been thinking around this area, experimenting, doing POCs, pilots, moving to scale ups in sections. What I do see happen is in the next couple of years will be mass intelligent automation. Now, if you see, this will all be driven, in my view, with a lot of business outcomes, whether it is revenue, customer experience, the examples we spoke of today, essentially, but also cost savings, process optimization at the back end, uh, manufacturing, improving product quality, or improving the manufacturing process further. There's a lot of automation, intelligent automation, AI, ML being used in that front. In supply chain, for example, AI to using AI in supply chain will essentially help you to reduce the inventory as well as improve the cash flow. So we've seen these experiments happen in the last couple of years across value chains, and pick the function and you'll find it. But I see this entire end-to-end journey or end-to-end processes, and companies essentially realizing that to improve their margins, to improve the profits, there are significant elements that they could possibly automate. And that's where I see this really being a big driver for organizations. And therefore, I think, yes, the answer is yes, we will get there.
All right. Anil, bring it all in together to distill into your summary statement in automation as a lever for not just innovation, but also growth for India. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I've said this many times before, Gautam. I think the world saw three irreversible trends: globalization, digitization, and mobility. In my view, the fourth irreversible trend this world will see is automation. I can't see a world, if we visualize 10 years from now, any organization not talking about an automation first strategy, not talking about automation as an innovation lever. And I'll tell you why. Because if you take any study, and I remember one study from McKinsey where they said that 50% of the current work activities that we do are technically automatable. 50%. That's just a huge number. And I think 6 out of 10 current occupations that we have, right, in the world, almost 30% of the activities done are technically automatable. And they talk of something to close to the tune of 3.6 trillion hours, right? So think about what is the upside that we still have to achieve. I think we're just beginning. In my view, automation has already moved from being seen as a tactical necessity to a strategic business enabler. And I would predict that as we go forward, the most business impacting organizations would be the ones that have a very clear defined automation first strategy in everything. It will be embedded at the starting point and not as an afterthought, Gautam.
All right. Automation is just the start of this wonderful journey of growth. On that note, though, it's time to wrap up our conversation around leveraging automation to drive digital transformation in business as part of our special presentation titled Forbes India Influencers of Change in partnership with UiPath. We've learned how successful conglomerates manage to create an enabling environment where everyone has a stake in the end-to-end customer journey while redefining the rules of engagement across the value chain. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for sharing their insights into influencing change using the power of technology. And of course, thank you to our viewers for tuning in. This is Gautam Srinivasan signing off.
Forbes India, Influencers of Change, in partnership with UiPath.